The wind here possesses a texture. It is not simply air moving across the land. It is a physical weight, a stinging, granular stream of ice crystals that scours everything it touches. If you were standing here, on the western edge of the Greenland ice sheet in July of 2006, you would feel as though you had stepped onto a different planet entirely. The horizon is a deception, a blinding, featureless seam where the white of the ice meets the white of the sky, erasing all sense of distance and scale. There are no trees to rustle, no birds to call out, no hum of distant traffic to remind you of the world you left behind. There is only the wind, and beneath it, a silence so profound it feels like pressure building in your ears. It is a silence that suggests solidity, permanence, and a world locked in stasis. But that silence is a lie. Because here, in this frozen desert, something is about to happen that will shatter our understanding of how ice behaves. Lying on the surface of this endless white expanse is a flaw, a bruise of impossible color. It is a supraglacial lake, a vast body of sapphire blue meltwater that has collected in a depression on the ice sheet. It spans nearly 2 miles across, shimmering under the unsetting sun of the Arctic summer. To the human eye, it looks peaceful, even beautiful, a serene reservoir of water resting atop a block of ice that is nearly a mile thick. It looks as though it has been here for 1,000 years and will be here for 1,000 more. But the ice beneath it is under stress. It is groaning under the weight of the water, and the tension is reaching a breaking point. It begins not with a splash, but with a rumble. At first, it sounds like thunder rolling in from a distance, or perhaps the low-frequency vibration of a freight train passing miles away. But there are no trains here. The sound grows louder, rising from the belly of the ice, vibrating through the soles of your boots. The surface of the lake, glass smooth only moments ago, begins to tremble, and then, without warning, the center of the lake seems to tear open. A crack, miles long, shoots across the basin floor. It is a violent, jagged fracture that splits the ice with the force of an explosion. And in that instant, the physics of the lake change completely. The water, billions of gallons of it, suddenly has somewhere to go. It does not seep. It does not trickle. It falls. A whirlpool forms, a terrifying vortex of blue water swirling madly as it drains into the newly opened wound in the ice. The sound is deafening now, a roar that drowns out the wind, a cacophony of rushing water and shattering ice that echoes across the empty plains. This is a moulin, a vertical shaft, carved by the water as it pummels its way down, and it is hungry. In less than 90 minutes, the entire lake, a body of water larger than some cities, holding more volume than 2,000 Olympic swimming pools, vanishes. It doesn't evaporate into the air. It plummets. It drives itself straight down, boring through nearly a mile of solid ice until it hits the bedrock below. The force of this falling water is equivalent to the power generated by Niagara Falls. It hits the bottom with such violence that it does not just sit there. It lifts the entire ice sheet. For a brief, terrifying moment, 1 billion tons of ice is jacked up, floating on a high-pressure cushion of water, sliding and lurching forward. The solid ground you thought you were standing on is actually a fragile crust, skating on a hidden, pressurized ocean that can appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. When the water is gone, the roar fades as quickly as it began. The silence returns, reclaiming the landscape. Where there was once a shimmering blue lake, there is now only a chaotic jumble of fractured ice blocks lying in a dry, empty crater. The wind picks up again, smoothing over the snow, hiding the scars. To anyone arriving an hour later, it would look as if nothing had happened. But deep below, in the dark, the water is still moving, lubricating the base of the glacier, speeding its journey to the sea, and rewriting the timeline of our planet's future. This phenomenon is known as hydraulic fracturing, and until recently, we had no idea it could happen on this scale or with this speed. It is a reminder that the ice is not a static monument to the past. It is a dynamic, volatile engine, and we are only just beginning to understand how the gears turn. Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity settles in softly at the edge of night, and science stretches itself out slowly, patiently, until the unknown feels a little closer. Tonight, we are standing on the edge of that crater in Greenland, looking down into the dark. We are exploring a mystery that has kept scientists awake for decades, questioning the very ground beneath their feet. We're going to a place where water behaves like a weapon, where lakes disappear in hours, and where the solid earth is anything but. But before we descend into the ice, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And is it quiet where you are? Maybe you can hear the rain against your window, or the hum of the city. Or maybe, like the place we're visiting, there is only silence. Whatever surrounds you, I can promise you it is safer than the shifting, cracking world we are about to enter. If this journey into the cold and the deep feels like the kind of quiet curiosity you enjoy, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd like this video or subscribe to Life Beyond Seen. It helps this gentle little corner of science find more people who might need a peaceful moment too. Now, make yourself comfortable, slow your thoughts, and follow me northward. Because the story we're telling tonight isn't just about ice, it's about what lies beneath it. When we look at the Greenland ice sheet on a map, we see a white void, a blank space. It represents stability, a massive storehouse of frozen water that changes only over geological timescales. We are taught that glaciers are slow. Glacial pace is a synonym for something that barely moves. We imagine them as slumbering giants, inching forward with the lethargy of deep time. But the event in 2006 shattered that illusion. It proved that the ice sheet is reactive, sensitive, and capable of sudden, catastrophic violence. The draining of North Lake was not an anomaly. It was a symptom. It revealed that the ice sheet is riddled with a circulatory system we cannot see, a labyrinth of veins and arteries carrying meltwater from the surface to the depths. This water does not just disappear. It works. It changes the thermal structure of the ice. It alters the friction at the bedrock. It transforms the glacier from a block of ice, dragging across stone, into a sled gliding on water. And this is why the frozen lakes beneath Greenland terrify scientists. Not because they are there, but because of what they can do. They are the hidden gears in a machine that controls global sea levels, and that machine is running faster than our models ever predicted. We used to think the ice sheet was a shield, protecting the interior from the warming climate. We thought it would take thousands of years for the heat to penetrate that mile-thick armor. But the lakes have shown us a back door. They have shown us that the heat doesn't need to melt the ice layer by layer. It can simply punch a hole and drop straight to the bottom. To understand the scale of this threat, we have to let go of our human sense of time and size. We have to think in terms of gigatons and centuries, pressure and flow. We have to imagine a world where water is heavier than rock and ice is as brittle as glass. We have to look at the surface, with its blinding beauty and its stinging wind, and realize that it is only a mask. The real story, the dangerous story, is happening in the dark, a mile beneath our boots. So, let's peel back the layers. Let's follow that water down the Moulin, through the twisting vertical rivers inside the glacier, and into the high-pressure underworld where the ice meets the rock. Let's try to understand the forces that can lift a continent of ice, and the mysteries that are still waiting to be discovered in the cold, crushing dark. Because if we want to know what the future holds for our coastlines, for our cities, and for our world, we first have to understand the terrible, beautiful power of the lakes that vanish in the night. To understand why the hidden lakes beneath Greenland's ice are a source of such profound anxiety for modern science, we have to go back to a time when we thought we could conquer the ice. We have to go back to a moment of supreme human arrogance, when the United States Army looked at the most hostile frozen landscape on Earth and decided to build a city inside it. It is 1,900 1959, the height of the Cold War. The world is gripped by a silent, vibrating fear of nuclear annihilation, a tension that hums beneath the surface of everyday life like a high-tension wire. In Washington and Moscow, generals are staring at maps, looking for advantages, looking for hiding spots, looking for the ultimate high ground. And in 1959, the ultimate high ground isn't a mountain or a satellite. It is the Greenland ice sheet. The logic is terrifyingly simple. Greenland sits at the top of the world, the shortest path between the Soviet Union and the United States. If you control the ice, you control the sky, but the surface is uninhabitable. The winds here can strip flesh from bone. The temperatures plunge to 60 degrees below zero. Storms rage for days, blinding white hurricanes that erase the horizon and turn the world into a featureless void. No army can survive on top of the glacier for long. So, the engineers make a decision that sounds like science fiction. They won't build on the ice. They will build times in times it. They call it Camp Century. The construction begins not with a whimper, but with the roar of massive diesel-belching machines called Peter Snow millers. These are monsters of Swiss engineering, giant rotary plows that chew through the compacted snow and ice, blasting it high into the air in great white arcs. They carve deep, precise trenches into the surface of the ice sheet, miles of them, arranged in a carefully planned grid. Once the trenches are cut, the men lower curved corrugated steel arches over the tops, burying them under fresh snow. The snow hardens. It bonds. It seals the trenches away from the wind and the fury of the Arctic storms. And beneath that protective shell, the city begins to rise. It is a marvel of logistics and stubbornness. Prefabricated plywood buildings are lowered into the tunnels. They build barracks. They build a kitchen. They build a laundry, a library, a hobby shop, and a chapel. There is a barber shop with a spinning pole. There is a theater showing the latest Hollywood films. There are hot showers, powered by a marvel of atomic ambition. This is the crown jewel of Camp Century. To power this city under the ice, the army does not rely on diesel generators alone. They bring in a portable nuclear reactor, the PM-2A. It arrives in pieces, dragged across the frozen wasteland on sleds, reassembled deep within the glacier. It is the first time humanity has ever tried to harness the power of the atom inside a block of ice. When the control rods are pulled and the reactor hums to life, the lights flicker on, bathing the plywood walls in a warm, artificial glow. Imagine, for a moment, standing in one of those tunnels in 1960. You are 30 feet beneath the surface of the ice sheet. Outside, a blizzard is raging, screaming across the flat white desert. But down here, it is quiet. The air smells of coffee and machine oil and damp wood. You can hear the distant hum of the reactor, the murmur of voices, the clatter of a pool ball sinking into a pocket. It feels safe. It feels permanent. It feels like humanity has finally beaten the elements. But Camp Century is a lie. The public story, the one told in cheerful newsreels and magazine articles, is that this is a scientific research station, a place to study the climate, to test construction techniques, to learn how men survive in extreme cold. And that is true, as far as it goes. Scientists are there. They are drilling the very first deep ice cores, pulling up cylinders of frozen history that will revolutionize our understanding of the Earth's climate. They are studying weather patterns and atmospheric physics. But deep within the command centers, known only to a select few, is the real mission. Project Iceworm. The army doesn't just want a base. They want a launch pad. The plan, ambitious, reckless, and secret, is to dig a vast network of tunnels covering an area 3 times the size of Denmark. In these tunnels, they plan to hide 600 nuclear missiles. These missiles will be mounted on trains, constantly moving through the dark, icy labyrinth, invisible to Soviet satellites, protected by the sheer mass of the glacier above. They will be the ultimate deterrent, a nuclear shotgun pointed at the head of the Eastern Bloc, buried in a place no one can reach. Camp Century is the prototype. It is the proof of concept. It is the first step toward turning the Greenland ice sheet into a weapon. And for a few years, it seems to work. The reactor hums. The soldiers conduct their drills. The scientists drill their cores. The United States has established a foothold in the most inhospitable place on the planet. They have hollowed out the glacier and made it a home. But they have forgotten one thing, the thing that defines the very nature of the place they are trying to conquer. They have forgotten that the ice is moving. They treat the glacier like rock, like a static foundation that will hold whatever shape they carve into it. But a glacier is not rock. It is a slow, relentless river. It is a viscous fluid that flows under its own immense weight. It is alive in a way that geology is not. It breathes, it shifts, it responds to pressure, and it hates empty space. The trouble starts slowly. At first, it is just a sound. In the quiet hours of the night, though day and night mean little in the tunnels, the men begin to hear it. Groans, creaks, sudden, sharp cracks that echo through the frozen corridors like gunshot. It is the sound of the ice settling, the sound of millions of tons of pressure seeking equilibrium. Then, the measurements begin to come in. The walls of the tunnels are moving inward. The ceilings are lowering. The floor is rising. The perfectly straight trenches they carved with such precision are beginning to twist and warp. The engineers fight back. They are the Army Corps of Engineers, and they do not give up easily. They send out crews with chainsaws and picks to trim the walls, shaving away the encroaching ice. They reinforce the steel arches. They jack up the buildings to keep them from being crushed. It becomes a constant, exhausting battle. Every day, the ice pushes in. Every day, the men push back, but the ice is patient. It has the weight of a continent behind it. It doesn't need to sleep. It doesn't need to rest. It just presses. By 1962, the deformation is becoming alarming. The nuclear reactor building, the heart of the camp, is settling unevenly. The heavy lead shielding and the massive concrete containment vessel are sinking into the floor, threatening to crack the pipes and release radiation into the tunnel. The train tracks they laid for the missile tests are twisting like ribbons. The plywood barracks are being squeezed, doors jamming shut, window frames buckling. The reality of the physics begins to set in. This is not a stable platform. This is a slow-motion compactor. Project Iceworm, the grand dream of a hidden nuclear arsenal, dies quietly. The generals realize that you cannot build a precision missile system inside a medium that deforms by meters every year. You cannot aim a weapon if the ground beneath it is constantly shifting. The ice has won the strategic battle, but Camp Century lingers for a few more years, a scientific ghost town fighting a losing war against the crush. The reactor is shut down and removed in 1963, shipped back to the United States because the risk of a leak is becoming too high. The lights go dim. The diesel generators roar back to life, burning thousands of gallons of fuel to keep the darkness at bay. Finally, in 1966, the order comes. Evacuate. The departure is hasty. The men pack up their personal belongings, their scientific instruments, their most valuable equipment. But they cannot take everything. It is too expensive, too difficult, too dangerous to haul every scrap of waste back across the ice sheet. And besides, they believe they have a perfect disposal system. They believe in the eternal freeze. The prevailing scientific wisdom of the 1,960 seconds tells them that the Greenland ice sheet is a permanent fixture. It has been there for millions of years. It will be there for millions more. Whatever they leave behind will be entombed forever, frozen in time, sealed by the crushing weight of the snow that will accumulate over it. It is the ultimate rug under which to sweep the debris of the Cold War. So they leave it. They leave behind the empty buildings, the plywood skeletons of their ambition. They leave behind the tunnels, now dark and silent. They leave behind vehicles, tools, and furniture. But that is not all they leave. Buried in the sumps and the sewage pits and the storage tanks of Camp Century is a toxic cocktail of 1,960 seconds industrial hubris. They leave behind roughly 200,000 liters of diesel fuel. They leave behind immense amounts of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, the carcinogenic fluids used in the electrical equipment of the time. They leave behind 24 million liters of biological waste, untreated sewage generated by years of habitation, and they leave behind low-level radioactive cooling water. The reactor is gone, but the water that kept it cool, tainted with the invisible signature of the atom, is poured into the ice, frozen into the very walls of the glacier. The Army engineers seal the entrances. They collapse the roofs of the access tunnels. They walk away, leaving the city to the dark and the cold, and for decades, the ice does exactly what they expected it to do. It covers the scars. Snow falls, year after year. The surface rises. The crushed remains of Camp Century are buried deeper and deeper, sinking into the white oblivion, 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters down. The base becomes a legend, a story told in military bars and scientific conferences. The city under the ice. The ghost of the Cold War, a place where time stopped in 1966. But time did not stop, and neither did the planet. This brings us to the source of the terror. The reason why this abandoned relic, half a century later, haunts the nightmares of climatologists and environmental scientists. The assumption of the eternal freeze was wrong. The men of 1959 could not have foreseen the world we live in today. They could not have predicted that the atmosphere would warm at such a terrifying rate. They could not have known that the Arctic would heat up 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. They operated under the belief that the ice sheet was a static vault. They did not know they were burying their poison in a melting bank. In recent years, satellites monitoring Greenland have revealed a disturbing trend. The ice sheet is losing mass. The melt zone, the area where snow melts in the summer rather than accumulating, is expanding. It is creeping inland. It is moving higher up the glacier. It is reaching toward the coordinates where Camp Century lies buried. Scientists have run the models. They have crunched the numbers, and the results are chilling. Within this century, perhaps within decades, the ice covering Camp Century will stop accumulating. It will begin to ablate, to strip away. Layer by layer, the protective shield of snow will vanish. The sun will reach down through the decades of accumulation, and eventually, the ice will release what it has held. Imagine the scene. A river of meltwater, clear and blue, carving its way through the rotting ice. It reaches the crushed remains of the tunnels. It mixes with the diesel fuel, turning the water into a toxic slick. It washes over the PCB-laden insulation. It seeps into the radioactive sumps, and then it flows. It flows downhill toward the coast. It flows into the pristine fjords of Greenland. It flows into the rich fishing grounds that sustain local communities. It flows into the North Atlantic Current. The ghosts of the Cold War, the toxic legacy of a failed dream, will not stay buried. They will be washed out into the world. This is the ghost of Camp Century. It is a ticking time bomb buried in the ice, but it is more than just an environmental hazard. It is a symbol. It is a perfect, terrifying metaphor for our relationship with the cryosphere. We thought we could use the ice. We thought we could ignore it. We thought it was just a backdrop, a container, a passive object. But Camp Century taught us the first and hardest lesson of the polar world. The ice is not passive. It moves, it crushes, it hides, and eventually it reveals. But the story of Camp Century is only the surface of the problem. It is the visible scar. What terrifies scientists today isn't just the man-made waste we left behind in the 1,960 seconds. It is what the ice itself is hiding. It is the natural forces, the immense, pressurized, dark waters that have been trapped beneath the glaciers for far longer than any human army has existed. Camp Century showed us that the ice can destroy what we build, but the hidden lakes beneath the ice show us something else. They show us that the ice can destroy itself. To understand this, we have to look away from the crushed tunnels of the 1,960 seconds and look deeper. We have to look past the solid ice, past the layers of snow, and down to the bedrock itself. Because while the army engineers were fighting the closing walls of their tunnels, they were standing on top of a mystery they didn't even know existed. They were standing on top of water. The physics of water and ice are strange, counterintuitive, and powerful. We tend to think that pressure makes things solid. If you squeeze a gas, it becomes a liquid. If you squeeze a liquid, it becomes a solid. But water is different. Water is a rebel. If you take a block of ice and you squeeze it, really squeeze it with the weight of 1,000,000 tons of glacier, something bizarre happens. It doesn't get harder, it melts. The pressure forces the crystal lattice of the ice to break down. The melting point drops, and so, deep beneath the coldest places on Earth, where the sunlight hasn't touched for 1,000,000 years, there is liquid water. For decades, we thought this was rare. We thought the bottom of the Greenland ice sheet was frozen solid to the rock, a dry, cold interface where nothing moved except the slow grind of the ice itself. We thought Camp Century failed because the ice flowed like plastic, not because it was sliding on water, but we were wrong about that too. Radar technology has evolved since the days of the Cold War. We no longer need to dig trenches to see what is happening beneath the surface. We can fly aircraft over the ice, beaming radio waves down through the kilometers of frozen water. The waves pass through the cold ice, bounce off the bedrock, and return to the sensors. And when scientists started looking at those radar returns in the 1,990 seconds and 2000s, they saw something that stopped their hearts. They saw flat spots. Bedrock isn't flat. It's jagged, mountainous, rough. Ice isn't perfectly flat either. It undulates and cracks. But in the radar data, deep in the interior of the ice sheets, there were vast stretches of perfect, mirror-like flatness, a signal that was too bright, too reflective to be rock or ice. It was the signature of water, lakes. Not just puddles, but massive bodies of water. Lakes the size of cities, lakes the size of small countries, trapped between the rock and the ice, sealed in a high-pressure tomb, completely cut off from the rest of the world. In Antarctica, we found Lake Vostok, a body of water the size of Lake Ontario, buried under 4 kilometers of ice. It was a revelation. It changed everything we knew about the hydrology of ice sheets. But in Greenland, the situation is different. In Greenland, the discovery of these lakes isn't just a biological curiosity, it is a mechanical threat. The difference lies in the temperature and the stability. Antarctica is a fortress of cold. Its subglacial lakes are relatively stable, ancient, deep. But Greenland is warmer. Greenland is changing. Greenland is responding to the climate crisis with a violence that Antarctica hasn't yet matched. The lakes beneath Greenland are not just sitting there. They are part of a plumbing system that we are only just beginning to map. And this plumbing system is leaking. Imagine a bathtub, a very large, very heavy bathtub filled with ice. Now, imagine pulling the plug. When a subglacial lake drains, it doesn't just trickle away, it explodes. The water, under immense pressure, forces its way through cracks and channels in the ice. It lifts the glacier up. It lubricates the bedrock. It creates a slip and slide effect on a geological scale. Camp Century was crushed because the ice flowed slowly. But what happens when the ice flows fast? What happens when a glacier, the size of a mountain range, suddenly detaches from the rock and surges forward, riding a wave of floodwater released from a hidden lake? This is the terrifying mechanism that keeps glaciologists awake at night. It is the fear that the ice sheet is not melting slowly, drop by drop, but that it could break apart mechanically, that the hidden water beneath it acts like a jack, lifting the ice and grease, speeding its slide into the ocean. And the trigger for this mechanism might be the very same thing that is unearthing the ghosts of Camp Century: surface melt. As the atmosphere warms, blue lakes form on top of the ice sheet in summer, sapphire eyes staring up at the sun. These lakes are beautiful, but they are dangerous. The water is heavy. It is denser than the ice. It wants to go down. It finds a crack, a hairline fracture in the ice, and it forces it open. The water drills its way down, creating a moulin, a vertical river, plunging into the heart of the glacier. It falls for a mile, gathering speed, gathering power, and when it hits the bottom, it hits with the force of a bomb. It adds heat. It adds pressure. It connects the surface to the bottom. It disrupts the ancient, delicate balance of the subglacial lakes. It is like injecting adrenaline directly into the veins of the ice sheet. We have seen it happen. We have watched surface lakes drain in a matter of hours, billions of gallons of water vanishing into the ice, causing the surrounding glacier to jump and shudder. We have measured the earthquakes caused by these events. We have seen the ice speed up. The ghosts of Camp Century are a warning from the past. Asterisk. Do not underestimate the ice. Asterisk. But the lakes beneath the ice are a warning for the future. Asterisk. The ice is waking up. Asterisk. The story of Camp Century was a tragedy of hubris. We built a city, and the ice crushed it. We left a mess, and the ice is returning it. But the story of the subglacial lakes is a thriller. It is a race against time to understand the physics of a collapsing system before it changes our world forever. Because if the plumbing system beneath Greenland fails, if the water lubricates the slide too efficiently, the ice won't just melt, it will collapse. And the consequences won't just be a toxic spill in a remote fjord. It will be coastlines around the world redrawn. It will be cities drowned. It will be a new geography for the human race. Camp Century was just the prologue. The real story is happening right now, in the dark, under 3 kilometers of ice, where the water is waiting. And to understand that water, to understand the life that might be hiding in it, and the threat it poses to our future, we have to look at the strange, violent ways it reveals itself. We have to look at the scars on the surface that tell us what is happening below. We have to look at the craters, because sometimes the ice doesn't just flow. Sometimes it collapses from within. When we look at the satellite images of Greenland today, we see strange depressions, circular pits in the white expanse. They look like impact craters, like something struck the ice from above. But nothing fell from the sky. The strike came from below. These are the tombstones of drained lakes, the aftermath of a subglacial flood. They are the evidence that the hidden world is active, dynamic, and volatile. In 2011, scientists discovered a crater in the ice sheet that hadn't been there the year before. It was 2 kilometers wide and 70 meters deep. A massive collapse. They calculated the volume of ice that had slumped, and it corresponded to billions of gallons of water. Where did it go? It didn't go into the sky. It didn't freeze. It blasted out from under the edge of the glacier, driving a plume of sediment and fresh water into the ocean that was visible from space. This was a jökullaup, a glacial outburst flood, a word borrowed from Iceland, where volcanoes beneath glaciers create similar catastrophes. But in Greenland, there are no volcanoes. There is only the pressure, the heat of the earth, and the changing climate. The crater was a smoking gun. It proved that the subglacial plumbing system is capable of rapid, catastrophic change. It proved that the water down there isn't staying put. And as the surface warms, as more moulin drill down to the bed, these events are becoming more frequent. The ice sheet is becoming a colander, porous, weakened. This is the context in which we must view the legacy of Camp Century. It is not an isolated incident. It is part of a continuum of change. The same warming that is melting the snow over the abandoned nuclear base is feeding the water to the bottom of the glacier. The same physics that crushed the tunnels are now threatening to destabilize the entire ice sheet. The irony is cruel. The men of 1959 went to Greenland to secure the future of their nation. They drilled, they built, they planned. They thought they were the protagonists of the story, but they were just fleas on the back of a sleeping giant. Now, the giant is stirring. And the legacy they left behind, the diesel, the PCBs, the radioactive coolant, is just a small part of the debris that will be swept up in the awakening. The ghost of Camp Century is pounding on the door from the inside, and the water beneath the ice is turning the handle. We often talk about climate change in terms of degrees. 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. It sounds abstract. It sounds manageable. But in Greenland, climate change isn't a number. It is a physical force. It is the crushing of steel beams. It is the warping of railroad tracks. It is the sudden, explosive drainage of a lake that has been dark for 10,000 years. It is the sound of the ice screaming as it tears itself apart. And as we stand here today, looking north, we have to ask ourselves, if the Army Corps of Engineers, with all their might and all their technology, couldn't fight the slow creep of the glacier in 1960, what chance do we have against the rapid collapse of the ice sheet today? The answer lies in the dark. It lies in the water. It lies in the hidden lakes that we are only just beginning to see. And as we peel back the layers of the ice, using radar and satellites and computer models, we are finding that the system is far more complex and far more terrifying than we ever imagined. The lakes are not just passive pockets of water. They are habitats. They are reactors. They are time capsules. And they are bombs waiting to go off. The ghost of Camp Century was our first warning, but it won't be our last. The ice has a long memory, and it is starting to tell its secrets. And the first secret is this: nothing stays buried forever. Not diesel, not radiation, and certainly not water. The era of the eternal freeze is over. The era of the melt has begun, and down in the dark, beneath the crushing weight of the winters, the water is starting to move. It was the summer of 2006, and on the western flank of the Greenland ice sheet, the world was deceptively quiet. If you were to stand there, boots crunching on the granular surface of the ablation zone, you would see a landscape of blinding, impossible beauty. To the east, the ice climbed toward the domed interior, a white desert rising to meet a pale sky. To the west, the intricate, shattered tongues of glaciers reached toward the sea. But right here, in the middle of this frozen expanse, lay something that looked like a tropical hallucination. A lake, a stunning sapphire blue lake, roughly 2 miles wide, resting in a depression of white ice. From the air, these supraglacial lakes look like jewels scattered across a necklace, brilliant turquoise spots on a canvas of white and grey. They form every summer as the sun beats down and the surface snow melts, pooling in the lows and valleys of the ice sheet. They are tranquil. They are silent. They ripple gently in the polar wind, reflecting the passing clouds like mirrors made of gemstone. In 2006, scientists knew these lakes existed. They had mapped them, photographed them, and admired them for decades. But they thought of them as relatively static features. They believed these lakes were essentially puddles, large, beautiful, passive puddles that would sit there until they froze over again in the winter, or perhaps slowly trickled over the edge of the ice sheet into the sea. They were wrong. They didn't know that this particular lake, and thousands like it, was not a puddle. It was a battery, a massive, accumulated storage of potential energy waiting for a trigger. And in July of 2006, that trigger was pulled. The resulting event would change everything we thought we knew about how ice sheets die. It would rewrite the textbooks on hydrology, and it would introduce a new kind of fear to the scientists who study the future of our coastlines. a fear born not from what we see happening at the edges of the glaciers, but from what is happening in the dark, violently, straight down through the heart of the ice. This is the story of the Great Vanishing. To understand the scale of what happened, we have to slow down and look at the setup. A team of researchers, including glaciologist Sarah Das from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and Ian Yoffen from the University of Washington, had been watching this specific lake. They called it North Lake. It wasn't a poetic name, but science rarely needs poetry to find drama. They had a theory. They suspected that these lakes might be doing something more than just sitting there. They wanted to know where the water went. So, they did what scientists do. They instrumented the ice. They deployed GPS units around the lake to measure the movement of the ice surface. They placed water pressure sensors into the lake itself to track its depth. They set up time-lapse cameras to watch it blink in and out of the daylight. It was logistical heavy lifting, flying in equipment by helicopter, drilling into the hard ice, securing cables against the wind, checking batteries that hate the cold. It was the mundane, methodical work of science, the tightening of bolts, the checking of screens, the waiting. For weeks, the lake did nothing. It sat there, blue and cold, holding billions of gallons of meltwater. The sensors hummed. The wind blew. The sun circled the horizon in the endless loop of the Arctic summer. It seemed as though the lake was mocking them, a stubborn blue eye refusing to blink. Then, on July 29th, the data tells us the story. It didn't start with a whimper. It started with a fracture. Somewhere beneath the basin of the lake, the ice, stressed by the immense weight of the water pressing down on it, finally gave up. It cracked. In a normal environment, a crack in the ground might be a problem. On an ice sheet, it is a catastrophe. Because water is heavy, heavier than ice, and water is relentless. As soon as that crack opened, the water from the lake rushed into it. And this is where the physics of the Arctic turns violent. This process is called hydrofracture. When water fills a crack in the ice, its weight presses outward against the walls of the fissure, driving the crack deeper. The deeper the crack goes, the more water rushes in, adding more weight, driving the crack deeper still. It is a wedge, a liquid wedge, driven by gravity and mass, splitting the glacier apart from the inside out. The sensors recorded the chaos. The lake level began to drop. At first, it was slow, a steady decline. Then, the bottom fell out. The crack didn't just go down a few meters. It didn't stop at 50 meters or 100 meters. Driven by the crushing weight of the water above, the fracture propagated all the way to the bottom of the ice sheet. It tore through nearly a kilometer of solid ice. That's 3,000 feet. A vertical tunnel, jagged and roaring, opened up in an instant, connecting the surface of the world to the hidden bedrock below, and the lake vanished. It didn't drain over days. It didn't seep away over weeks. In less than 2 hours, nearly all of the water in North Lake, more than 11 billion gallons, disappeared. Imagine the sound. If you had been standing on the shore of that lake, you would have heard a noise like the earth itself was tearing apart. A roar of rushing water louder than a jet engine, louder than a freight train. A whirlpool of terrifying power would have formed over the fracture, sucking giant blocks of ice, car-sized chunks, down into the abyss. The air would have vibrated in your chest. The ice beneath your boots would have shuddered as the weight of the water shifted, redistributing the stress of the entire glacier. 11 billion gallons. That is enough water to fill 17,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Gone. In the time it takes to watch a movie, the sheer violence of the flow was staggering. The water fell straight down, hitting the bedrock beneath the ice with the force of a bomb. In fact, the energy released by the falling water was equivalent to the energy of a tactical nuclear weapon. But instead of an explosion of fire, it was an explosion of hydraulic pressure. When the researchers came back to check their instruments, the lake was gone. In its place was a chaotic jumble of fractured ice blocks, stranded on the dry lake bed, like the ruins of a bombed-out city. Giant shards of white and blue ice, some the size of houses, lay tilted at crazy angles, and in the center, or near the flank, was the scar, the moulin, the vertical shaft that had swallowed the world. But the vanishing of the lake was only the first act. The terrifying part wasn't that the water was gone. The terrifying part was where it went. For years, there had been a debate in glaciology. Some scientists believed the ice sheet was frozen to the bedrock, stuck in place by friction. Others believed it slid. The drainage of North Lake provided a definitive, frightening answer. When those 11 billion gallons of water hit the bottom of the ice sheet, they didn't just sit there. The water was under immense pressure. It forced its way between the ice and the rock. It lifted the entire glacier up. Think about that. A sheet of ice, nearly a kilometer thick, weighing billions of tons, was physically lifted off the ground by the force of the water. The GPS units on the surface recorded the movement. As the water lubricated the bed, the friction that held the ice back disappeared. The glacier lurched. It accelerated. It surged forward, sliding downhill toward the ocean. The data showed that in the days following the drainage, the local ice flow speed doubled. The entire region of the ice sheet, spanning tens of kilometers, moved. It was as if the glacier had been injected with adrenaline. This was the lubrication effect that scientists had theorized but rarely seen with such clarity. The meltwater from the surface acted like oil in an engine. It turned a slow, grinding crawl into a slip and slide, and it proved that the connection between the surface and the bottom was not slow or gradual. It was instant, it was violent, and it was highly efficient. The implications were chilling. Before this, climate models largely assumed that meltwater on the surface would stay on the surface or run off superficially. They assumed it would take centuries for heat to penetrate the thick ice and affect the base. But the North Lake event showed that heat and water could be transported from the top of the ice to the bottom in a matter of minutes. The ice sheet was not a solid shield. It was a sieve, a porous, dynamic system that could respond to warming temperatures with terrifying speed. Between 2006 and 2008, the team watched it happen again and again. They realized that North Lake wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom. Across the western flank of Greenland, as the summers warmed, more lakes were forming at higher elevations, and as they formed, they were draining. A cascade of vanishing lakes. One lake would drain, sending a shockwave of stress through the ice sheet. That stress would crack the ice under a neighboring lake, triggering it to drain, a domino effect of hydrofracture, unzipping the ice sheet from the inside out. The darkness beneath the ice was being flooded. We often talk about climate change in terms of degrees of temperature or inches of sea level, but the story of the lakes brings it down to a visceral, mechanical reality. It brings it down to the sound of ice cracking, to the feeling of the ground dropping out, to the realization that a structure we thought was permanent, the Greenland ice sheet, is actually riddled with weaknesses that water is all too eager to exploit. The scientists published their findings. The papers came out in Times, Science Times, and Times Nature, *. The graphs were clean, the data precise. They spoke of basal lubrication and transient acceleration. But beneath the academic language, there was a palpable sense of unease. The ice was moving faster than it should. The plumbing system of the glacier was far more efficient than anyone had guessed. And the mechanism for destroying the ice sheet wasn't just melting from the edges, it was an attack from within. By 2009, the picture was becoming even more complex. The researchers began to understand that the water didn't just lubricate the ice, it carved it. Once the water reached the bottom, it began to flow. Subglacial rivers, dark and turbulent, roared beneath the millions of tons of ice, carving channels into the sediment and rock. These channels, called R-channels, became the hidden arteries of the glacier. In some ways, these channels helped stabilize the flow. If the water could drain out to the ocean efficiently, the ice would settle back down on the rock, and the sliding would slow. But if the water system was overwhelmed, if too much water came down too fast, as it did when a lake drained, the channels couldn't handle it. The water pressure would skyrocket, lifting the ice again, destabilizing vast sections of the sheet. It was a battle between the formation of channels and the input of water, a race between the plumbing system's ability to drain and the surface's ability to melt. And as the years ticked toward 2010, the surface was winning. The summers were getting longer. The melt season was extending. The ablation zone, the area of the ice sheet where melting occurs, was creeping inland, climbing higher up the ice dome. Lakes were appearing in places where the ice had been frozen solid for thousands of years. And where lakes appeared, fractures followed. This period, from 2006 to 2010, marked a psychological shift in the scientific community. Before, there was a sense that we had time, that ice sheets were lumbering beasts, slow to anger, slow to move. The great vanishing of the lakes shattered that illusion. It showed us that the ice is reactive, it is sensitive, it has a tipping point, and it showed us the violence of the process. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea of a lake that simply falls through the floor. It defies our understanding of how the world should work. We trust the ground beneath our feet. We trust that a lake has a bottom. But in Greenland, the bottom is temporary. The ice is a membrane, stretching tight over a dark, pressurized world that wants to break free. During these years, the researchers didn't just rely on remote sensors. They walked the ice. They camped next to these time bombs. Imagine sleeping in a tent on the surface of a glacier, knowing that a mile away a lake could be draining, knowing that the rumble you hear in the middle of the night isn't thunder, but the sound of the ice sheet adjusting its weight, groaning as it slides a fraction of an inch faster toward the sea. One researcher described the sound of a nearby moulin as a low-frequency roar that you feel in your bones. A moulin is the aftermath of the drainage. Once the crack opens and the lake drains, the hole often stays open for the rest of the summer. It becomes a drain pipe for all the meltwater in the surrounding area. Rivers of bright blue water rush across the white surface, carving meandering canyons until they reach the moulin. Then, they plunge. Standing at the edge of a moulin is like standing at the edge of the world. You look down into the blue darkness, and you see nothing but the spray of water and the endless walls of ice going down, down, down. The sound is deafening. The air is cold and wet. It smells of ancient water and crushed rock. It is a portal to the underworld, and in those years, the number of portals was growing. By 2010, it was clear that the hydrology of the Greenland ice sheet was a major wildcard in sea level rise predictions. The water was doing double duty. It was adding volume to the ocean directly, and it was speeding up the delivery of solid ice into the sea. It was a feedback loop. Warmer air melts more surface ice. More surface water creates more lakes. More lakes create more fractures. More fractures send more water to the base. More water at the base speeds up the flow. Faster flow brings more ice to the lower, warmer elevations, where it melts faster. Round and round it goes, a spiral of accelerating loss. But there was another discovery in this period, perhaps even stranger than the draining lakes. As scientists looked closer at the data, they found that the water wasn't just going to the ocean. Some of it was staying down there. The sponge effect. The researchers realized that the area beneath the ice wasn't just a smooth rock slide. It was a landscape. Valleys, hills, basins. When the water rushed down, it filled these subglacial pockets. It created hidden lakes, dark and pressurized, completely cut off from the world above. These subglacial lakes, unlike the ones on the surface, never saw the sun. They sat in the crushing dark, under a kilometer of ice, holding water that might stay there for a season or a century. This meant the ice sheet was retaining water. It was getting heavier, and this added mass changed the stress on the bedrock, potentially influencing everything from the local gravity field to the way the Earth's crust rebounded. The complexity was overwhelming. The ice sheet wasn't just a block of ice. It was a hydrologic system as complex as any river delta, but buried under a mile of frozen armor. The Great Vanishing of 2006 to 2010 wasn't just about the disappearance of the blue water from the surface. It was about the vanishing of our certainty. We learned that we couldn't predict the behavior of the ice by simply looking at the air temperature. We had to look down. We had to understand the plumbing. We had to accept that the ice sheet was a dynamic, living thing, capable of sudden, violent change. And we had to accept that we were poking the beast. As the decade drew to a close, the scientific focus shifted. It wasn't enough to just map the lakes anymore. We needed to know how much water was reaching the bed. We needed to know how the subglacial channels evolved over the season. We needed to model the friction, the pressure, the flow. The documentary for sleep might lull you with images of slow-moving ice, but the reality discovered in these years was anything but sleepy. It was insomnia-inducing. It was the realization that the engine of the Arctic was revving up. Every summer, the melt season arrived a little earlier. Every summer, the lakes turned a deeper shade of blue as they absorbed more heat. Every summer, the web of fractures spread a little wider. The scientists returning to their camps found the landscape changed. A ridge that was there last year was gone. A stream had changed course. A moulin had opened up where their tent used to be. The impermanence of the ice was on full display. And yet, despite the violence, there was a strange elegance to it all. The way the water found the weakness in the ice. The way the ice adjusted to the water. The physics were brutal, yes, but they were also perfect. Nature seeking equilibrium. The ice sheet trying to shed its mass in response to a warming world, using every tool at its disposal. Gravity, pressure, lubrication, fracture. It was a system working exactly as the laws of physics demanded. It just so happened that the result of that system working was the potential drowning of coastal cities thousands of miles away. The story of the North Lake drainage is a story of connection. It connects the sun beating down on the surface to the rock hidden in the dark. It connects the microscopic structure of ice crystals to the global sea level. It connects the silence of the Arctic to the noise of human industry that warmed the climate in the first place. And it connects us to the fear, because when you see a lake vanish in an hour, you realize how fragile the world really is. You realize that things we think are permanent mountains, glaciers, coastlines, are only permanent on a human timescale. On a geological timescale, they are fluid. They move, they break, they vanish. The scientists who witnessed the Great Vanishing returned home with hard drives full of data. They had the numbers, they had the charts, but they also had the memory of the sound, the roar of the water, the shudder of the ice, the feeling of standing on a giant dying thing that was thrashing in its sleep. They knew that the lakes were just the beginning. The surface was waking up, the deep ice was responding, and the water was finding its way down, searching for the cracks, searching for the bottom, searching for the fastest way to the sea. As 2010 ended, the question wasn't times if times the lakes would drain again. The question was times, how many asterisk, and how fast, and what would happen when the water reached parts of the ice sheet that had never felt the touch of liquid before. The frontier of the melt was moving north, into the colder, darker, more stable parts of Greenland. The mechanism of destruction had been identified, and now it was on the march. The ice, once thought to be a silent tomb for the past, had found its voice, and it was screaming. But to truly understand the threat, we have to go deeper than the lakes. We have to follow the water after it vanishes. We have to squeeze ourselves into those dark, jagged fractures and descend with the torrent. We have to go to a place where the pressure is enough to crush a submarine, and where the water doesn't just flow, it fights. This brings us to the hidden rivers, the veins of the glacier, the subglacial labyrinth that no human has ever seen, but which holds the fate of the ice sheet in its twisting, freezing dark. If the lakes are the battery, the hidden rivers are the wire, and the current is getting stronger every year. So let's follow the water down, past the layers of snow from the 19th century, past the hard blue ice of the Viking Age, past the dusty grey ice of the last ice age, down into the crushing blackness where the ice meets the earth. This is where the real story happens. Not in the sunlight, but in the dark. Not in the silence, but in the roar. This is where the glacier decides whether to stay or whether to slide. And in the years that followed the Great Vanishing, the glacier began to make its choice. It is the summer of 2014, and on the western flank of the Greenland ice sheet, something is wrong with the color of the world. When we dream of the Arctic, we dream in white. We imagine a landscape of blinding purity, a frozen desert where the snow reflects the sun with such intensity that to look at it without protection is to risk blindness. We imagine a place that is clean, sterile, and timeless. But here, in a region that scientists have begun to call the dark zone, the white is gone. In its place is a bruise that stretches for hundreds of kilometers, a stain of grey, charcoal, and violet that looks, from the window of a passing helicopter, like soot or ash or the shadow of a cloud that refuses to move. But it is not a shadow, and it is not ash. Step out onto the ice here, and the silence is different. It is not the crisp, dry silence of the high interior. It is a wet, heavy silence, broken by the sound of water. Everywhere there is the sound of water. It trickles through millions of tiny pores in the surface. It rushes in rivulets of sapphire blue that carve winding paths through the grey slush. It roars in the distance, where great rivers of meltwater plunge into moulins, vertical shafts that drop thousands of meters into the black heart of the glacier. The air here smells different too. It does not smell like snow. It smells faintly organic. It smells like wet earth, like a cellar that has been closed for a century, like something waking up. This is the dark zone, a strip of ice roughly 400 kilometers long and up to 100 kilometers wide. And in the years between 2014 and 2019, it becomes the stage for a discovery that will fundamentally change our understanding of the ice and of the future that is rushing toward us. Because the darkness here is not just dust blown in from distant deserts or soot from wildfires in Canada, though those things are present. The darkness is alive. To understand why this terrifies scientists, you have to look down. You have to kneel on the wet, granular surface of the melting ice sheet, press your face close to the grey slush, and look at what is actually there. It is not dirt. It is a bloom. Millions upon billions of microscopic organisms are writhing in the upper few centimeters of the ice. They are glacier algae, specifically a species known as Times Ancylonema nordenskioldii *. To the naked eye, they look like dust. Under a microscope, they are beautiful, tiny, purplish-brown filaments that look like strung beads. They are ancient. They have existed here for millennia, dormant, waiting, locked in the ice like secrets kept in a cold vault. But now, as the Arctic warms, as the melt season lengthens, as the liquid water they need to survive becomes more abundant, they are blooming on a scale that defies history. They are the Lazarus microbes, life returned from the dead. And they are hungry. They hunger for sunlight. And to get it, they have evolved a defense mechanism that is both brilliant and catastrophic for the planet. The sun on the ice sheet is fierce. The UV radiation is intense enough to damage the delicate cellular machinery of these tiny plants. So, over thousands of generations, they have developed a sunscreen. They produce a pigment, a deep, dark, purple-brown phenol, that shields their insides from the radiation. It allows them to thrive in the harsh glare of the Arctic summer. But basic physics tells us that dark colors absorb heat. By darkening their bodies to protect themselves, These trillions of microbes are darkening the ice sheet itself. They are turning the surface from a mirror, which reflects the sun's energy back into space, into a dark blanket that absorbs it. The result is a feedback loop of terrifying efficiency. The algae grow, they produce pigment. The ice darkens. The dark ice absorbs more heat. The heat melts more ice. The liquid water liberates more nutrients and wakes up more dormant algae. The colony expands. The dark zone widens, and the Greenland ice sheet, this sleeping giant that holds enough water to raise global sea levels by more than 7 meters, begins to bleed faster than our physics models ever predicted. It is 2016. A team of researchers from the Black and Bloom Project, a major UK-led initiative, establishes a camp deep within this darkening world. They are here to ground truth the satellite data, to understand the biology of the melt. Imagine their daily reality. They live in tents pitched on ice that is constantly shifting and melting beneath them. Every morning, they wake up to a world that has changed slightly from the night before. A stream that was jumpable yesterday is a torrent today. A patch of firm ice is now a slush swamp. The wind howls across the flat expanse, carrying with it the bite of the pole, but the sun beats down with a relentless, inescapable heat. A scientist walks out to a sampling site. Her boots crunch on the rotten ice, a term glaciologists use for ice that has become porous and honeycombed by the sun. She carries a drill and a scoop. She is looking for cryoconite holes. These are cylindrical pits in the ice, formed when wind-blown dust or clumps of algae absorb heat and melt their way vertically downward. She finds one. It looks like a small, perfect well, perhaps 10 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters deep. At the bottom lies a deposit of dark, silty material. It looks like mud, but when she scoops it out and places it into a sterile vial, she knows she is holding an entire ecosystem in the palm of her hand. Inside that vial are bacteria, viruses, tardigrades, and the algae themselves. It is a microcosm of life that thrives in freezing water, and among them are the giants. During this period, between 2014 and 2019, another realization begins to dawn on the scientific community, one that adds a deeper, more primal layer of fear to the equation. It is the realization that the ice is not just a habitat for modern algae, it is a museum of ancient pathogens. In 2014, French scientists announced they had revived a virus from Siberian permafrost that was 30,000 years old. Asterisk. Pithovirus. Sibericum. Asterisk. It was a giant virus, visible under a standard microscope, and after 30 millennia in the dark and the cold, it was still infectious. It woke up in the lab and immediately began to hunt amoebas. It did not hunt humans. It was harmless to us, but its awakening sent a shockwave through the scientific world. It proved that biological entities could survive in deep freeze for geological timescales and return to function as if no time had passed at all. The ice does not kill. It preserves. It presses pause on the biological clock. Now, look back at Greenland. The ice here is not just frozen water. It is a layered archive of the atmosphere stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. It contains dust, pollen, volcanic ash, and microbes that fell from the sky long before the pyramids were built, long before the first cities rose, long before humans walked out of Africa. As the dark zone expands and the ice melts down to older and older layers, these ancient sleepers are being released. They are washing out of the ice matrix and into the meltwater streams. They are meeting the modern algae. They are entering the food web of the Arctic Ocean. The fear is not necessarily a Hollywood-style plague, though the thought of ancient diseases re-emerging is a valid concern for local wildlife and perhaps humans. The deeper fear is ecological chaos. What happens when you introduce biological variables that haven't interacted with the surface world for 100,000 years? What genetic instructions are written in their DNA? What metabolic tricks do they possess? The scientists in the dark zone are not just studying algae. They are watching a biological time machine break open. By the summer of 2017, the scale of the biological darkening is becoming impossible to ignore. Drone footage captured by the teams reveals a landscape that looks fractured and diseased. The cryoconite holes have merged in places, creating vast, lace-like patterns of water and dark sludge. From the air, the ice sheet looks like a lung that has breathed in too much smoke. Jason Box, a glaciologist who has spent years studying Greenland, has warned about this for a decade. He speaks of the albedo feedback, the loss of reflectivity. He notes that physical models of melting often fail to account for the biology. They treat the ice as a rock, a sterile physical object that melts according to simple thermodynamic equations. But the ice is not a rock, it is a petri dish, and the biology is rewriting the equations. The algae are ecosystem engineers. They are modifying their environment to suit their needs. They need liquid water, so they darken the ice to melt it. They are farming the glacier, and in doing so, they are accelerating the destruction of one of the planet's most critical cooling systems. There is a specific moment in the field that captures the uncanniness of this. A researcher pauses in her work. The wind dies down, the sun is high, and all around her, she hears a sound like 1,000,000 tiny explosions. Asterisk. Pop. Snap. Hiss. Asterisk. It is the sound of the ice releasing pressurized air bubbles that were trapped thousands of years ago. It is the breath of the ancient atmosphere escaping, but mixed with that is the wet, gurgling sound of the cryoconite holes deepening. It sounds alive. It sounds like digestion. The scientists take samples of the surface water. They measure the photosynthetic activity. The results are staggering. The algae are operating at a level of efficiency that rivals forests. In the middle of a frozen wasteland, on top of a glacier that is supposed to be dead, there is a productivity boom. The dark zone is a factory of life, powered by the sun, churning out biomass, and paying for it with the ice itself. And the feedback loop is getting stronger. 2018 brings another record-breaking season of warmth. In the dark zone, the meltwater rivers are swollen. They carve canyons into the ice, grand, winding gorges of polished blue walls that shimmer in the sunlight. These rivers carry the dark algae and the ancient sediments downstream, eventually dumping them into the ocean. But they also redistribute the darkness across the ice surface, spreading the infection. The terror that scientists feel is not a panic. It is a slow, cold realization of helplessness. They realize that we cannot stop this. You cannot spray fungicide on an ice sheet the size of Mexico. You cannot scrub the algae off. The bloom is a natural response to an unnatural warming. The system has tipped. The ice has entered a new state, one where biology is a driver of climate change, not just a passenger. There is also the mystery of the zombie viruses to consider in this wet, dark landscape. While the media latches onto the term zombie, the scientific reality is more subtle and more disturbing. Genetic analysis of the meltwater reveals a soup of genetic material fragments of DNA from bacteria, fungi, and viruses that have not been catalogued. Some of these are giant viruses, the Times Nucleocytoviricota asterisk. These are viral entities so large and complex that they challenge the very definition of what a virus is. They carry genes for metabolic processes, genes that viruses shouldn't have. They are like floating toolkits, ready to hijack a host and begin replicating. In the slush of the dark zone, these viral giants are meeting hosts amoebas and other simple organisms that thrive in the algal bloom. It is a microscopic war zone, a frenzy of infection, replication, and lysis occurring in the freezing slush. And every time a virus bursts a cell open, it releases nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, iron back into the water. These nutrients act as fertilizer. They feed the algae. The viral infection, the death of the microscopic hosts, actually makes the algae grow faster. The death fuels the bloom melts the ice. The melting ice releases more ancient viruses. The cycle tightens. It is a perfect engine, and it is running out of control. By 2019, the research papers coming out of these expeditions are painting a stark picture. The biological darkening is responsible for a significant percentage of the runoff from the Greenland ice sheet. Some estimates suggest that up to 13% of the melting in the dark zone is caused directly by the algae. That might sound small, but when you are dealing with gigatons of water, 13% is an ocean of difference. It is the difference between a seawall holding and a city flooding. It is the difference between a stable climate and a chaotic one. But there is a psychological toll to this work too. The scientists who spend their summers in the dark zone speak of a strange dissonance. It is incredibly beautiful. The patterns of the cryoconite holes, the sapphire blue of the rivers, the violet hue of the algae against the ice. It is an alien, artistic landscape. It is mesmerizing, and yet, it is a landscape of death. Every beautiful feature is a wound. The blue rivers are the ice bleeding out. The violet bloom is a bruise spreading. The sound of running water is the sound of a clock ticking down. To stand there is to witness a colossus dying by 1 trillion paper cuts. One of the most haunting discoveries of this period involves the depth of the life. For a long time, it was assumed this was just a surface phenomenon, but radar and drilling suggest that liquid water and potential biological activity isn't just on top, it is inside. The rotten ice can extend meters down. The cryoconite holes can connect to subsurface aquifer systems within the glacier. There are hints that the algae and bacteria are not just sitting on the ice, they are migrating into it. They are finding protection from the cold snaps in the porous, water-filled layers beneath the surface. They are adapting to become a permanent resident of the glacier's skin. This resilience is what scientists refer to as the Lazarus capability on a daily scale. They can freeze solid when the winter comes, entering a state of cryptobiosis, a suspended animation where their metabolism stops entirely. They dry out. They shut down. They become indistinguishable from dust. They wait. The winter of the Arctic is long, dark, and brutal. Temperatures drop to -40, -50 degrees. The wind scours the surface. The dark zone is buried under meters of fresh white snow. It disappears. To any observer, the ice sheet looks pristine again. The white returns. The silence returns. But beneath the snow, the Lazarus microbes are still there. They are not dead. They are merely sleeping. They are waiting for the sun to return. They are waiting for the snow to melt away, revealing the grey ice once more. And when the first warmth of spring touches them, they will wake up. They will repair their cellular damage in minutes. They will begin to photosynthesize. They will produce their dark sunscreen, and they will begin to eat the ice again. This persistence is the true horror of the dark zone. It is not a one-time event. It is a ratchet mechanism. Every year, the algae start with a larger population base. Every year, the melt season starts a little earlier. Every year, the bioalbedo feedback loop accelerates. The scientists pack up their camps at the end of the 2019 season. They dismantle the weather stations, pull up the tent stakes, and pack the samples of grey slush into coolers. They fly back to civilization, back to universities in Bristol, Aberystwyth, Potsdam, and Colorado. They run their data through supercomputers. The numbers come back, and they are grim. The biological darkening is expanding. It is moving uphill, climbing higher onto the ice sheet as the climate warms. Regions that were once too cold for the algae are now becoming habitable. The dark zone is growing, and as it grows, it reveals the fragility of our assumptions. We thought the ice was just ice. We thought it was passive. We thought it would melt only because the air was getting warmer. We forgot that the Earth is a living system. We forgot that life is opportunistic. We forgot that even in the coldest, bleakest places on the planet, there is a hunger waiting to be fed. The story of the Lazarus microbes is not just a story about biology. It is a story about the unforeseen consequences of our actions. By warming the planet, we haven't just turned up the thermostat. We have woken up a sleeping giant. We have unlocked a biological vault. We have given an ancient, microscopic ecosystem the keys to the Arctic, and it is reshaping the world to suit its needs. As the decade closes, the scientists look at their maps of Greenland. They see the white interior, the last stronghold of the cold, and they see the grey ring of the dark zone closing in around it, like a noose tightening. They know that next year, the bloom will be bigger. They know that the melt will be faster. They know that the ice remembers. It remembers a time when Greenland was green, millions of years ago, and it seems, through the relentless work of these tiny, violet cells, that it is trying to return to that state. The Lazarus microbes have risen, and they are turning the white world dark, one microscopic cell at a time. The silence of the ice is over. Now, there is only the sound of the melt, a chorus of 1 trillion tiny voices, eating the cold, drinking the sun, and washing the history of our planet into the rising sea. And as we leave the surface, drifting up away from the grey, pockmarked skin of the glacier, we must ask ourselves, what else is waiting down there? If the surface is this alive, this reactive, this full of ancient secrets waking up, what about the deep? What about the bottom? Because beneath the ice, beneath the blooming algae and the rotten surface, beneath the grinding weight of the glacier, there is another world entirely. A world of total darkness, a world of crushing pressure, a world where the water does not freeze, even when it should. We are going deeper now. We are leaving the sunlight and the violet blooms behind. We are descending into the miles of ice that separate the surface from the bedrock. Down here, the rules of biology change again. Down here, there is no sun to fuel the Lazarus microbes. Down here, if life exists, it must be something else, something stranger. We are heading toward the subglacial lakes, the hidden oceans that have been sealed away for 1 million years. And if the surface was terrifying because it was waking up, the bottom is terrifying because it never sleeps. It waits. In the dark, something is flowing, and scientists are just beginning to hear it. Stand on the surface of the Greenland ice sheet today, in the height of summer, and you will see something that looks less like a frozen desert and more like an alien archipelago. The white horizon, once unbroken and blinding, is now pockmarked with thousands of sapphire jewels. These are supraglacial lakes, vast bodies of meltwater pooling on the surface of the ice, absorbing the sun's heat, shimmering with a beauty that belies their violence. They look peaceful, like lagoons on a tropical island, misplaced in the Arctic. But this water is not meant to be here, and it does not intend to stay. To understand the terror that keeps scientists awake at night, you have to watch one of these lakes die. It does not evaporate. It does not freeze. It waits. It waits for a weakness in the ice below it, a hairline fracture, a stress point, a tiny imperfection in the crystal lattice of the glacier. And when it finds it, the lake transforms from a passive pool into a weapon. It happens with a sound like a cannon shot. The ice beneath the lake gives way, cracking open in a jagged fissure that can run for kilometers. And then the draining begins. Imagine Niagara Falls, with all its thunder and power, but instead of falling over a cliff, it is falling into a hole. A vertical shaft, known as a moulin, opens up, and millions of gallons of water begin to spiral down into the darkness. The whirlpool is terrifying to behold. It sucks down ice blocks the size of cars, grinding them to slush. The air trapped in the shaft is forced out by the rushing water, screaming as it escapes, a sound that has been described by researchers as the ice sheet howling in pain. In a matter of hours, a lake that took all summer to form is gone. Just gone. Left behind is a crater of shattered ice and a silence that feels heavier than before. But the water hasn't disappeared. It has simply moved. It has traveled from the surface, where it was relatively harmless, to the one place where it can do the most damage. It has gone to the bottom. This is the mechanism that haunts the models of climate scientists. It is called the hydraulic lift, and it is the hidden engine of the ice sheet's destruction. When that column of water slams into the bedrock a kilometer or more below, it arrives with the force of a falling skyscraper. It does not just sit there. It is under immense pressure, the weight of the entire lake pressing down on it from above. It needs somewhere to go. So it forces its way between the ice and the rock. Think of a car on a hydraulic jack. You pump the handle, forcing fluid into a cylinder, and suddenly a 2-ton vehicle lifts off the ground with ease. The physics beneath Greenland are identical, but the scale is apocalyptic. The water, pressurized and desperate, pushes the ice sheet up. It physically lifts billions of tons of ice off the bedrock. It may only be by a few centimeters, or even millimeters, but that is enough. The friction that held the glacier in place, the grinding contact between ice and stone that acted as a brake for thousands of years, is suddenly gone. The glacier is no longer dragging itself over rough terrain. It is floating. It is sliding on a frictionless cushion of high-pressure water. And so, the ice begins to run. This is not the slow, geologic creep we learned about in school. This is a surge. Scientists stationed on the ice have recorded these events in real time. They set up GPS stations, anchored deep into the glacier, expecting to see them move a few centimeters a day. Then, a lake drains nearby. The data spikes. The GPS unit lurches forward, covering the distance of a week in a single hour. The ice beneath their tents groans and shifts, destabilized by the lubrication below. They are riding a landslide in slow motion, a continent of ice sliding toward the sea, accelerated by its own meltwater. The terror lies in the feedback loop. As the glacier speeds up, it transports ice from the high, cold interior to the lower, warmer edges much faster. At lower elevations, the air is warmer, so the ice melts faster. More melt means more lakes. More lakes mean more drainage events. More drainage means more hydraulic lift, which means faster flow, which brings more ice into the melt zone. It is a cycle that feeds itself, a runaway train that is picking up speed with every passing summer. And once this engine is fully running, we do not know if we have the brakes to stop it. The scale of this hydraulic system is something we are only just beginning to map. For years, we assumed the water beneath the ice flowed in simple rivers, finding the easiest path to the ocean. But the reality, revealed by modern radar and seismic listening posts, is far more complex and far more dangerous. The water does not just flow. It creates a pressurized plumbing system that connects vast regions of the ice sheet. A lake draining in one area can pressurize the bed miles away, triggering a cascade of movement across the entire glacier. It is a domino effect played out on a canvas the size of Mexico. In the present day, we are seeing this phenomenon spread. In the past, supraglacial lakes were confined to the edges of Greenland, the warmer margins where the elevation was low. But as the Arctic warms, the freezing line is climbing higher. We are now seeing lakes forming inland, high up on the ice sheet, in places that were once dry snow zones. This is the nightmare scenario. If water begins to penetrate the thick, stable interior of the Greenland ice sheet, the heart of the glacier that holds the bulk of its mass, the potential for destabilization grows exponentially. We are injecting lubricant into the very foundation of the ice sheet's stability. And the ice is reacting. You can hear it. Walk near the edges of the Jakobshavn Glacier today, and the silence of the Arctic is gone. The air is filled with a low-frequency rumble, a vibration more than a sound felt in the chest. It is the sound of ice fracturing under stress. It is the sound of a glacier moving too fast for its own structure to hold together. Huge crevasses, scars of tension, are opening up across the surface, tearing the ice apart as it races toward the fjord. And, at the terminus, where the glacier meets the ocean, the violence becomes visible. Calving events, where icebergs break off into the sea, are becoming more frequent and more massive. These are not small chunks of ice. These are city blocks, skyscrapers of frozen water collapsing into the ocean. When they fall, they create tsunamis that can scour the coastlines. But more importantly, they represent a permanent loss. Once that ice is in the ocean, it is gone. It raises the sea level instantly, like an ice cube dropped into a glass. And the hydraulic lift is the conveyor belt delivering these cubes to the glass faster and faster. The scientists studying this are not alarmists. They are measured, careful people who speak in data points and error margins. But listen closely to them when the recording devices are off, or read between the lines of their urgent reports, and you will sense a shift in tone. A decade ago, the conversation was about times, if times Greenland would destabilize. Today, the conversation is about times how fast asterisk. The models of the past, the ones that predicted a slow, linear decline over centuries, are being discarded. They didn't account for the violence of the water. They didn't account for the hydraulic lift. They treated the ice as a solid block, not a dynamic, leaky, moving system that interacts with the rock below. We are watching the waking of a giant. For 10,000 years, the Greenland ice sheet has slept, its mass held in check by the cold and the friction of the bedrock. Now, we have poured water into its bed, we have greased the skids, and the giant is beginning to slide. But the threat goes deeper than just the speed of the ice. It is about the unpredictability. This hydraulic system is chaotic. We cannot map every channel, every cavity, every weak point in the bedrock. We do not know when a specific lake will drain or which path the water will take. This means that our ability to predict sea level rise is compromised. We can estimate, we can model, we can guess, but the ice holds the final card. A sudden reconfiguration of the subglacial plumbing could trigger a surge that releases gigatons of ice in a single season, rewriting the coastlines of the world in a way we are not prepared for. Consider the implications of that uncertainty. Civil engineers planning seawalls in New York, Miami, or Shanghai need to know how high the water will rise. They need a number, but the hydraulic lift refuses to give a steady number. It promises volatility. It promises pulses of rapid rise interspersed with pauses, a jagged line on a graph that makes planning nearly impossible. How do you build for a future that depends on the chaotic flow of water beneath a kilometer of ice 3,000 miles away? This is the tyranny of the hidden hand of climate. It acts at a distance. You do not see the lake draining in Greenland while you are standing on a beach in Florida. You do not hear the roar of the Moulin. You do not feel the ground shake as the ice sheet lifts. But the water comes all the same. It creeps up the storm drains. It erodes the cliffs. It salts the groundwater. The connection is invisible, but it is absolute. The physics happening in the dark, cold underbelly of the Arctic are directly writing the future of the tropics. And as we look closer at this mechanism, we find another layer of complexity, another reason for concern. The water that reaches the bed does not always stay fresh. In some places, the ice sheet extends out into the ocean, grounded below sea level. Here, the hydraulic systems interact with the ocean itself. Warm, salty seawater is pushing its way under the glaciers, meeting the cold, fresh meltwater rushing down from above. This mixing creates turbulence, heat exchange, and aggressive melting from below. It is a double attack. Water from the top pushing the ice toward the sea, and water from the sea eating the ice from the bottom. The majesty of these processes is undeniable. There is a terrible beauty in the power of water to move mountains. To see a river erupt from the base of a glacier, roaring like a jet engine, grey with the silt of ground-up continents, is to witness the raw energy of the planet. But it is a beauty that carries a price. Every liter of that water, every silt-filled torrent, represents a structural failure of the ice sheet. It represents a bleeding out of the cryosphere. The narrative of the Arctic has always been one of endurance. We think of the ice as eternal, a white fixture at the top of the world that has weathered the ages. But the hydraulic lift teaches us that the ice is fragile. It is structurally compromised. It is riddled with holes, veins, and arteries that are pumping its own lifeblood out into the ocean. It is not a fortress. It is a sieve. Present-day observations confirm this fragility. In recent years, we have seen melt events that defy historical precedent. We have seen rain falling at the summit of Greenland, a place where it should only ever snow. That rain does not just sit on the surface. It percolates down, adding heat, adding weight, adding water to the hydraulic system. We are altering the very state of matter in the Arctic, turning a solid world into a liquid one. And liquids move. Liquids flow. Liquids cannot be contained. This transition from solid to liquid is the crux of the global threat. A solid ice sheet stays where it is. A liquid one enters the global ocean, and the transition is happening faster than biology or civilization can adapt. We often talk about climate change in terms of degrees of temperature, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. These numbers feel abstract, but the hydraulic lift translates those abstract numbers into kinetic energy. It turns heat into motion. It turns a degree of warming into a gigaton of moving ice. There is a psychological weight to this knowledge too. For the scientists who spend their seasons on the ice, watching the lakes form and vanish, there is a sense of helplessness. They are recording the symptoms of a terminal diagnosis. They can measure the speed of the flow. They can map the moulins. They can calculate the volume of the discharge. But they cannot stop it. The physics are in motion. The ball is bouncing, and it is gaining momentum with every impact. The darkness beneath the ice, which we spoke of as a place of mystery and potential life, is now also a place of mechanical failure. The darkness is where the friction is lost. The darkness is where the grip of the ice on the land is slipping. It is no longer just a static void. It is a busy, noisy, active workspace where the dismantling of the ice sheet is being carried out with industrial efficiency. And what happens when the water runs out of room? As the hydraulic pressure builds, it can do more than just lift the ice. It can fracture it. Hydrofracturing is a process where pressurized water forces cracks to expand, splitting the ice apart. This can cause ice shelves, the floating tongues of glaciers that hold back the flow from the interior, to shatter completely. We have seen this in Antarctica, where shelves the size of small countries have disintegrated in a matter of weeks. Greenland's glaciers are different, confined in narrow fjords, but the principle is the same. If the dams break, the flow behind them accelerates. The water is searching. It is probing the weaknesses of the ice, looking for a way down, looking for a way out, and it is finding them. Every summer, the network of moulins expands. Every summer, the drainage area grows. We are witnessing the evolution of a new hydrology, one adapted to a warmer world, one designed to evacuate ice into the ocean as efficiently as possible. It is strange to think that the fate of coastal nations, of island states, of port cities, hangs on the behavior of water molecules deep inside a glacier in the desolate north. But gravity binds us together. When Greenland loses mass, its gravitational pull on the surrounding ocean weakens. The water that used to be held close to Greenland's shores by gravity is released, sloshing across the ocean to pile up on the coastlines of the southern hemisphere and North America. It is a cruel irony. The melting of the north drowns the south. The action is here, but the reaction is global. As we stand in the present day, watching the satellite feeds, tracking the melt extent, we are watching a system pass a tipping point. The wind here possesses a texture. It is not simply air moving across the land. It is a physical weight, a stinging, granular stream of ice crystals that scours everything it touches. If you were standing here, on the western edge of the Greenland ice sheet in July of 2006, you would feel as though you had stepped onto a different planet entirely. The horizon is a deception, a blinding, featureless seam where the white of the ice meets the white of the sky, erasing all sense of distance and scale. There are no trees to rustle, no birds to call out, no hum of distant traffic to remind you of the world you left behind. There is only the wind, and beneath it, a silence so profound it feels like pressure building in your ears. It is a silence that suggests solidity, permanence, and a world locked in stasis. But that silence is a lie, because here, in this frozen desert, something is about to happen that will shatter our understanding of how ice behaves. Lying on the surface of this endless white expanse is a flaw, a bruise of impossible color. It is a supraglacial lake, a vast body of sapphire blue meltwater that has collected in a depression on the ice sheet. It spans nearly 2 miles across, shimmering under the unsetting sun of the Arctic summer. To the human eye, it looks peaceful, even beautiful, a serene reservoir of water resting atop a block of ice that is nearly a mile thick. It looks as though it has been here for 1,000 years and will be here for 1,000 more. But the ice beneath it is under stress. It is groaning under the weight of the water, and the tension is reaching a breaking point. It begins not with a splash, but with a rumble. At first, it sounds like thunder rolling in from a distance, or perhaps the low-frequency vibration of a freight train passing miles away. But there are no trains here. The sound grows louder, rising from the belly of the ice, vibrating through the soles of your boots. The surface of the lake, glass smooth only moments ago, begins to tremble, and then, without warning, the center of the lake seems to tear open. A crack, miles long, shoots across the basin floor. It is a violent, jagged fracture that splits the ice with the force of an explosion, and in that instant, the physics of the lake change completely. The water, billions of gallons of it, suddenly has somewhere to go. It does not seep, it does not trickle, it falls. A whirlpool forms, a terrifying vortex of blue water swirling madly as it drains into the newly opened wound in the ice. The sound is deafening now, a roar that drowns out the wind, a cacophony of rushing water and shattering ice that echoes across the empty plains. This is a moulin, a vertical shaft, carved by the water as it pummels its way down, and it is hungry. In less than 90 minutes, the entire lake, a body of water larger than some cities, holding more volume than 2,000 Olympic swimming pools, vanishes. It doesn't evaporate into the air. It plummets. It drives itself straight down, boring through nearly a mile of solid ice until it hits the bedrock below. The force of this falling water is equivalent to the power generated by Niagara Falls. It hits the bottom with such violence that it does not just sit there. It lifts the entire ice sheet. For a brief, terrifying moment, 1 billion tons of ice is jacked up, floating on a high-pressure cushion of water, sliding and lurching forward. The solid ground you thought you were standing on is actually a fragile crust, skating on a hidden, pressurized ocean that can appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. When the water is gone, the roar fades as quickly as it began. The silence returns, reclaiming the landscape. Where there was once a shimmering blue lake, there is now only a chaotic jumble of fractured ice blocks lying in a dry, empty crater. The wind picks up again, smoothing over the snow, hiding the scars. To anyone arriving an hour later, it would look as if nothing had happened. But deep below, in the dark, the water is still moving, lubricating the base of the glacier, speeding its journey to the sea, and rewriting the timeline of our planet's future. This phenomenon is known as hydraulic fracturing, and until recently, we had no idea it could happen on this scale or with this speed. It is a reminder that the ice is not a static monument to the past. It is a dynamic, volatile engine, and we are only just beginning to understand how the gears turn. Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where curiosity settles in softly at the edge of night, and science stretches itself out slowly, patiently, until the unknown feels a little closer. Tonight, we are standing on the edge of that crater in Greenland, looking down into the dark. We are exploring a mystery that has kept scientists awake for decades. questioning the very ground beneath their feet. We're going to a place where water behaves like a weapon, where lakes disappear in hours, and where the solid earth is anything but. But before we descend into the ice, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And is it quiet where you are? Maybe you can hear the rain against your window, or the hum of the city. Or maybe, like the place we're visiting, there is only silence. Whatever surrounds you, I can promise you it is safer than the shifting, cracking world we are about to enter. If this journey into the cold and the deep feels like the kind of quiet curiosity you enjoy, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd like this video or subscribe to Life Beyond Scene. It helps this gentle little corner of science find more people who might need a peaceful moment too. Now, make yourself comfortable, slow your thoughts, and follow me northward. Because the story we're telling tonight isn't just about ice, it's about what lies beneath it. When we look at the Greenland ice sheet on a map, we see a white void, a blank space. It represents stability, a massive storehouse of frozen water that changes only over geological timescales. We are taught that glaciers are slow. Glacial pace is a synonym for something that barely moves. We imagine them as slumbering giants, inching forward with the lethargy of deep time. But the event in 2006 shattered that illusion. It proved that the ice sheet is reactive, sensitive, and capable of sudden, catastrophic violence. The draining of North Lake was not an anomaly. It was a symptom. It revealed that the ice sheet is riddled with a circulatory system we cannot see, a labyrinth of veins and arteries carrying meltwater from the surface to the depths. This water does not just disappear. It works. It changes the thermal structure of the ice. It alters the friction at the bedrock. It transforms the glacier from a block of ice, dragging across stone, into a sled gliding on water. And this is why the frozen lakes beneath Greenland terrify scientists. Not because they are there, but because of what they can do. They are the hidden gears in a machine that controls global sea levels, and that machine is running faster than our models ever predicted. We used to think the ice sheet was a shield, protecting the interior from the warming climate. We thought it would take thousands of years for the heat to penetrate that mile-thick armor. But the lakes have shown us a back door. They have shown us that the heat doesn't need to melt the ice layer by layer. It can simply punch a hole and drop straight to the bottom. To understand the scale of this threat, we have to let go of our human sense of time and size. We have to think in terms of gigatons and centuries, pressure and flow. We have to imagine a world where water is heavier than rock and ice is as brittle as glass. We have to look at the surface, with its blinding beauty and its stinging wind, and realize that it is only a mask. The real story, the dangerous story, is happening in the dark, a mile beneath our boots. So, let's peel back the layers. Let's follow that water down the Moulin, through the twisting vertical rivers inside the glacier, and into the high-pressure underworld where the ice meets the rock. Let's try to understand the forces that can lift a continent of ice, and the mysteries that are still waiting to be discovered in the cold, crushing dark. Because if we want to know what the future holds for our coastlines, for our cities, and for our world, we first have to understand the terrible, beautiful power of the lakes that vanish in the night. To understand why the hidden lakes beneath Greenland's ice are a source of such profound anxiety for modern science, we have to go back to a time when we thought we could conquer the ice. We have to go back to a moment of supreme human arrogance, when the United States Army looked at the most hostile frozen landscape on Earth and decided to build a city inside it. It is 1959, the height of the Cold War. The world is gripped by a silent, vibrating fear of nuclear annihilation, a tension that hums beneath the surface of everyday life like a high-tension wire. In Washington and Moscow, generals are staring at maps, looking for advantages, looking for hiding spots, looking for the ultimate high ground. And in 1959, the ultimate high ground isn't a mountain or a satellite. It is the Greenland ice sheet. The logic is terrifyingly simple. Greenland sits at the top of the world, the shortest path between the Soviet Union and the United States. If you control the ice, you control the sky, but the surface is uninhabitable. The winds here can strip flesh from bone. The temperatures plunge to 60 degrees below zero. Storms rage for days, blinding white hurricanes that erase the horizon and turn the world into a featureless void. No army can survive on top of the glacier for long. So, the engineers make a decision that sounds like science fiction. They won't build on the ice. They will build times in times it. They call it Camp Century. The construction begins not with a whimper, but with the roar of massive diesel-belching machines called Peter Snow Millers. These are monsters of Swiss engineering, giant rotary plows that chew through the compacted snow and ice, blasting it high into the air in great white arcs. They carve deep, precise trenches into the surface of the ice sheet, miles of them, arranged in a carefully planned grid. Once the trenches are cut, the men lower curved corrugated steel arches over the tops, burying them under fresh snow. The snow hardens. It bonds. It seals the trenches away from the wind and the fury of the Arctic storms. And beneath that protective shell, the city begins to rise. It is a marvel of logistics.